Welcome back to the Crimson Chat, your go-to show for meaningful conversations and inspiring stories straight from the heart of the University of Kansas. I'm your host, Jaden Hill, and today we're talking about something that doesn't always make headlines, but shapes every headline we read. Our guest today is Dr. Scott Reinardy, Interim Dean and Malcolm Applegate Professor in News Management and Editing here at KU. Dr. Reinardy is a nationally recognized scholar whose work focuses on burnout, work-life balance, and organizational change in newspaper and television newsrooms, especially as journalists are asked to do more, faster, and with fewer resources. Before he entered academia, Dr. Reinardy spent years working in daily newspapers, and his research today is deeply rooted in the lived experiences of newsroom professionals. His work asks an important question: how can journalism survive if the journalists themselves are burning out? Dr. Reinardy, welcome to the Crimson Chat. We're so excited to have you today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Jade.
Before we get really deep into your research, I want to know a little bit about yourself. You've spent time in newsrooms that we've talked about. Now you're in academia, an interim dean. When people ask what do you do or what your career has been like, how do you answer that question?
It's a great question, and in our lives we never take one straight path anywhere, and when you're young you can't always see the future by any means. I grew up in a very small town in Minnesota, 369 people. My parents did not have the opportunity to go to college. I was a first generation college student. I went to South Dakota State, wanted to move away from home and experience the world. Had no idea what I was doing or what I was getting into. So my path has always been a little unusual in terms of I moved away and never went back home, which was okay. But I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to write, and I wanted to report, and I wanted to be in that environment. So that's one advantage I always had. I always had a goal of what I wanted to accomplish. As for academia, that became a different type of path, by all means. I'd worked in the business for many years, went to get my master's and PhD, not really realizing I was moving into academia. My first job was at Ball State University, and it was about my second year at Ball State I realized I'm no longer a journalist, I'm an academic. I'm a teacher. I wanted to help students with my experiences and to get into the classroom and try to show them or help them learn how to move into the professional world. And I thought that was a much better path than becoming a newspaper editor or continuing in media where I work with a staff. This way I could work with hundreds or thousands of students over the course of a career. And I thought I had something to offer, and I hope I have something to offer as we proceed.
And you mentioned this a little bit, but you were a sports writer originally.
I was.
Who transitioned into going to a PhD. How did you start that transition? So, I mean, you were in the newsroom, you were writing, and then how does one even get on the track to a PhD, especially in journalism?
Yes, and as a sports journalist, that was really uncommon. When I graduated, when I finished my studies in 2006, I was one of very few who had actually been in sports media and then went to get a PhD. Much of it happens with the people around you and the people who can help you and support you. And my wife has always been fantastic in that. We had a conversation. We were working at the same paper at the time, and I was covering a hockey beat, the Penguins minor league team, the American Hockey League team, and I had that winter driven about 15,000 miles and wrote 300 stories in 6 months, and I was gone, and our son was 2 years old, and I thought, well, I wanted a better work-life balance. So I had suggested to her that I become a smoke jumper. I jump out of planes, put out fires. And she said, you'll kill yourself. And I said, yeah, probably. The next day she said, well, if you want to do that, and I said, no, that'd be ridiculous. I will kill myself. How about if we look at going to graduate programs? I get into a graduate program and start pursuing that path forward. Not really having a goal of what I would do with a master's degree. When I finished my master's, it was, well, I might as well get a PhD. But at that time, my wife and I took our son. I know some people may not appreciate this. Went to Mizzou to get my master's and PhD. But I had a low-paying assistant sports editor job in the Missourian newsroom. She did not have a job, and we had a 2-year-old. So we quit our newspaper jobs, packed up everything, moved across the country. At that time, I was 35 years old. So that's kind of crazy to make that leap, but we had confidence and faith in what we were doing. We knew we could work hard and you know, thought that might be a better path moving forward instead of working nights and weekends and traveling all over the country. And you know, I really wanted to change my work life history because I wanted to be there for our son, and I wanted to be there for us as a family. And working the hours I was in the newsroom was not advantageous to that. So.
Speaking of your work history, I'm curious, what was your very first journalism job?
I was fortunate. After I graduated from South Dakota State, 3 days later I started at the Aberdeen American News in Aberdeen, South Dakota. It was a 25,000 circulation daily newspaper. As a sports journalist there, a 3-person staff. It was a fantastic experience. We had a wonderful staff, fantastic people around us, great community. So it was just a great opportunity to go to that position. And it was interesting, the editor and publisher asked me, well, why should we hire you? They're also looking at another very experienced journalist in the state to hire for that position. I said, I don't have bad habits. I'm willing to learn, and you can train me the way you want, and instead of bringing in baggage. And I think in part that helped me get the job.
That's something I haven't really thought about with, you know, coming into a job with less experience. Yeah, you do have less experience, but in a way that could be an advantage for a lot of employers, especially if you have those foundational skills of writing and all of that type of stuff. And to go a little bit more into your research, you really focus on the human side of journalism and what it's like to be a professional in the industry. Was there a moment when that really stood out to you? Was it a culmination of events that really brought out that humanistic side of the profession? What was that like?
Yeah, you know, you see it all around you. And when you're in it, you can't necessarily identify the burnout or identify the stressors. You do, but it's like, oh, okay, I just had a bad day. Tomorrow will be better. You just keep working through it. And because you're committed to providing a service to the community, to that social responsibility, you're willing to take on a lot and just, you know, kind of tough it out. But that isn't advantageous to anybody. One thing that really struck me, and I write about this in a book I wrote about my research, had a general manager, and we were having a conversation one day, and he asked, well, what's going on in the newsroom? And I said, well, I think there's some real morale issues. And he says, well, I see morale as just a bad attitude. And that struck me because it's like, you know, we work really hard here. We're trying to do well. And when we bring up a serious issue concerning the people in your newsroom, your most valuable resource, you dismiss it as, you just have a bad attitude. And I didn't take it as a personal affront to me, but holistically, we could see what was going on. So it wasn't a moment, but then when I got into my studies, you start thinking about, okay, all the pressures around you. And for a journalist, there's many of them. The audience, you have bosses, multiple bosses, you have colleagues, you have competitors. There's just a lot of people asking you to do a lot of things. And how do you manage that stress, and how do you deal with that? And to have that expectation of audience of, you know, to get it right, to not make mistakes, to make sure you're doing good journalism ethically every day can be incredibly challenging. It's a lot of work and effort. And I started to think, what are the implications of all that downward pressure on the individuals who are doing it? I could feel it myself, but I also saw it amongst people around me.
Did you feel like journalism specifically became kind of all-encompassing in your life? Did you ever feel like you were just a journalist and less of a person? As some people that I talk to, especially if they have just started getting into the journalism career, just happens to be that I'm in this school, so I have those conversations with a lot of post-grad. They're like, I just feel like I'm a journalist all the time. Because partly, I mean, you kind of are, right? And you're constantly thinking, okay, what's my next story? Where can this is something interesting. Should I write something about this? Should I figure out this? Should I do an interview with this person? Did you ever feel that way?
Oh, sure. I feel it today. Because here's the thing, and we talk about this with students. We are training you to see the world differently. So everything you look at in some capacity, as you mentioned, is a story. There's something either working or not working, or there's a problem or a curiosity of why is that happening like that? To this day, the same thing happens. I can't break from that. That every moment, every day, and I'm not writing about it. I can't carry the title as journalist anymore, which is a little disheartening. But you want to be sincere and honest and humble to the people who are actually going out there doing it. But you see that once you see the world differently, you can't undo that. So yeah, every day, and it's really enjoyable when you first graduate, because if all you have to do is your journalism and not go to class and not do all the other social things and all the other obligations, it's wonderful, because it feels as if you have all this time and you're very immersed in that. And then you start thinking about other life things like, okay, partners and family life and vacation, and you'll want things in your life as well. So that kind of evolves as you evolve as a person. But yes, once you understand how to critically analyze the world looks so much differently. The challenge is to be a skeptic and not a cynic. It's very easy to be a cynic when you see the world that way, and because then you see a problem around everything instead of saying, maybe something just happens because it happens, or maybe that person's just having a bad day. Let's not assume that's a bad person. So it does change your thinking, and you have to weigh that and balance that and pull yourself back from, let's not just criticize everything. Let's actually provide some grace and look at it more deeply to find out what's really happening here. No issue is just simply this or that. There's a whole bunch of things in the middle that are happening that sometimes you know about and sometimes you don't.
And speaking of this, you mentioned all of those things outside of the journalism career, like family, and other things. Do you feel like it's really important that you still make sure that you have your hobbies and things like that? And speaking of, what is that thing for you?
Oh, absolutely. Excuse me. We, and we talk about it all the time. In fact, I've said it twice to some of our faculty and staff this week. Family first. You have to look around. You have to have that balance, because if this is all it is, this is what happens. Someday you're going to retire, and if the job is the only thing you're hanging on to, that's incredibly challenging, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, physically, to make that transition into that different world. So to not just make it the one thing. For me, it's multiple things. Family, clearly. Have 2 grandchildren, and they're just fantastic, and so they're in town, so we get to see them quite often. I do woodworking. I still play sports. I play hockey and baseball. So I've got a lot of different releases that I look at and try to encourage our faculty, look, and our staff. There's other things, and they're very good at that. To understand that there is a balance there. And what I've found with your generation, you all are much better about it than our generation. Our generation was, we're just going to work, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to work, but I'm also going to enjoy my life. I find my generation has been less likely to embrace that notion, because we come from our previous generation. It was just like, you work, and that generation came out of World War II, and it's just this domino effect. Your generation is like, okay, yeah, I'll work. You're going to pay me, that's good, and I'm going to have work-life balance, much better work-life balance.
So we've touched on it a couple of times, but to really get into definitions, can you explain what burnout is?
Sure.
And then also describe what it looks like in journalism specifically?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The component I used was developed by 2 social psychologists in the 1970s, Maslow and Jackson, and they were looking at nurses. And they're looking at how nurses work 12-hour shifts, and they're dealing with patients and a lot of stress. And they looked at 3 elements: exhaustion, how much you're working, and how exhausted. Everyone kind of understands exhaustion. Cynicism in the job, moving from that skepticism part, particularly in journalism, to cynicism, that you're a cynic about your job, that it's just like, oh, I guess I could go out and cover this story again, or whatever the case may be. And then professional efficacy, how much enjoyment, confidence and enjoyment you get from the job. And high rates of exhaustion and cynicism and low rates of professional efficacy lead to burnout. What does that look like? Interestingly enough, I spoke with one of our graduates just yesterday. She's been tremendously successful in the print journalism world. And she's been doing 7-8 years now. Started off at Kansas City Star, has now moved on. But she's thinking about a career change. And she says, yeah, I know I'm burned out. You know, some days I'm fine for a while, but it's coming more frequently where I'm overwhelmed, I'm overstressed, I have anxiety attacks, it's, you know, and so we're having this conversation. And the complication for her particularly, and it's all of us, and I said, I'm going to assume something here, and I said this to her, I said, I have the feeling you're feeling guilty about walking away from journalism, that there's this guilt. I said, look, we all go through it. But you have to do what's best for you. And you will find once you leave and go work wherever you're going to work, those stressors, when they're removed, your health is going to get better, your mental health is going to get better, you're going to see a much better improved, you know, being. I mean, she'll just be better off. But she knows it's happening, and it's been happening to her. We had this conversation 2 years ago. So it's been happening for some time. She's starting to identify. And that's what it is. And I've been around it enough and know people enough where I can say, yeah, you're really on the edges. But it's just when you're just exhausted and you can't hardly do it anymore, and you have this pull of obligation, the social responsibility, yet it's such a struggle. And then of course there's some physical elements to that, like I said, anxiety, stress, panic attacks, whatever the case may be, particularly when you're facing deadlines all the time, or it's this constant motion. And as you get older generally, and you start to have family and other stressors and other responsibilities, it's compounded because the work then interferes with the things you really want to do. You want to spend time with your children. You want to spend time going to events. You want to be, you want to be part of the community in a different way than just covering the community. And so all that builds up. And there, people, there are ways to manage that within the organization. I think in this former student's particular case, I said, at this point, I don't think you have any room to manage that in your organization. From what you're telling me, you probably need to change jobs, and that's what she's considering.
And you touched on this a little bit, but I think people can understand how nurses get burnt out or other professions. Can you explain why journalism in particular, that stress? So someone who's in it, I get it, because what does it mean to always have a deadline, always looking for that next story? But for those who aren't in journalism, can you kind of explain that world a little bit?
Sure, and this is one of the notions I had early on. I thought it would be most advantageous to look at, and I did not do this specifically, but look at crime reporters or accident reporters. If you're going to accidents 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, and you're seeing the carnage of that, the human carnage, the wreckage, what it does to police officers and to EMTs and people on the scene, first responders, if you're in that all the time, that takes its toll. I mean, there's a lot of psychological and emotional toll, but and some studies have done this since, post-traumatic stress in that. So if you're in that all the time, and there's always this obligation to chase the next story, it may not be a car crash, but the next story, or to get the information out, or the pressure of not getting beat on a story, or getting something wrong, or being attacked by politicians, sources, the audience, that's a lot of negativity coming your way. And how to manage that becomes incredibly complicated. Some people manage it better than others. But you'll find, and studies have shown this, most journalists are introverts, which is odd, but think about it. You're behind the scenes, you're trying to represent a community, you're telling a story, you want the community to be informed, but you want to do it behind the scenes. Yeah, your name is on a story or even on a broadcast, you're there with the microphone and you're telling the story, but you're still not the story. You're not the issue. The issue is the issue. So to be behind the scenes and to do that is incredibly rewarding, but it's incredibly complex as well, because you always have to be on, always. And in this environment with social media and there is no deadline anymore. The deadline is always 24/7, 365. So if you always are on and you're never off, when are you able to recover? When do you get enough sleep? When do you get to emotionally relax and get away from it? Even on vacation, I know, cell phones, people take it's a constant. It's just a constant hum that doesn't go away.
And so even with the fact that, as you mentioned, especially with social media now, it is just constant deadline. It's constantly you need to be doing something. But on top of that, you've also mentioned how journalists are having to do more with less.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'll talk specifically of newspapers. About 56% of newspaper journalists have been laid off or taken buyouts in the past 15 years. So you have smaller newsrooms, and now you have more things to do. And the mistake that many newspapers made, and this is through my research, not just my opinion, but they would go to a newsroom and say, okay, I understand blogging's a thing now. Everyone's going to blog, without a purpose of doing that. So it's more work to do. Oh, we're going to shoot video now. Well, I've never shot video before. Well, we'll do some training. You'll be fine. Okay, now I've got to do video. Okay, now we want you to post 8 times a day on social media. Okay, but I got to report this story. How am I going to? You figure it out. So they were giving more things to do without the tools or the time or the resources to do it in a smaller work environment. And so then if I worked one beat, I worked the KU beat, and maybe I'm also covering, the courts. Well, that's 2 really big things in this community. So a lot more work to do, fewer people to do it, and a lot more platforms to do it on. And that became, it's just too much. There's not enough hours in the day to do everything they're asking. So that became problematic. It has become problematic. So it's more with less, and what suffers in the back end is the quality. Now, I don't expect that any newsroom ever generally would give you, oh, take 3 days to write that city commission meeting story. That's not going to happen. But there has to be a balance there. There's X amount of work that has to be done. We understand that. But what do we need to do well, and how can we do that?
Do you feel like burnout is inevitable in this profession? I mean, you've mentioned that it's not just something that happens right away. It tends to be maybe a longer process, but it feels almost like it's inevitable.
Well, I worked in journalism for 14 years, and I don't think I ever burned out, because in part, some of the counterbalance that is different jobs, different responsibilities. I worked, as you mentioned, I worked in sports for a number of years. When I went to the Missourian, I was a news editor. And I was news editor for education, and I was a news editor, general assignment news editor. So I had different jobs, different responsibilities. And that's the trick with the organization, is to be able to move people to say, okay, what if you took 2 weeks and worked on an investigative piece, or a month? Can we break you away to do that? To be able to do some different things, and to rotate in and out, and to continue to support and train your people. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened too often. And we know traditionally people have worked in newspapers for 30, 40, 50, 60 years and never really experienced what we'd call wholesale burnout. So it is possible, but you also have to have an organization that's going to continue to help you grow and develop, and to recognize, yeah, we probably need to get you doing something else for a while, just to break you from that routine that's so much downward pressure is being placed upon you. So it is possible, no doubt about it.
Well, I mean, that's good to hear, of
It
course.
is,
And
it
it's
is.
sort of adapting to, I think, the new age of journalism, which kind of brings me to my next topic. Another thing that you've looked at is, how do newsrooms adapt in the modern age? What does that adaptation look like? Can you speak to that?
Sure, and I've done some immersive work in newsrooms to see that. It's one of those things where initially, and I don't advise, I provide information from my research. And what I've seen is the newspapers that are most successful is they take an audit of what they're doing. What needs to be done? What can we do effectively? Let's work toward our strengths. For instance, in Lawrence, you have to cover this campus. It's the biggest employer in town. You cannot ignore what happens on top of the hill. You just can't. But you may not, then in exchange, you may not be covering something that happens at a city commission subcommittee, for instance, that ultimately ends up in the city commission. So you have to decide what you're going to cover and how to cover it well. Easier said than done, of course. I'm not managing a newsroom, so it's easier for me to say that. But decide what is most important to your community and most important to your audience. And to be relevant in your audience, because to your audience. If you're not relevant in your community, you're going to lose that audience. There are so many options out there, and that becomes a struggle. Of course, there's a whole conversation about the economic models and so forth. But you know, putting people in position to succeed is vitally important. And a lot of it has to do with what are we trying to do here and how can we do that most effectively. And that brings in AI, for instance, and there's, you know, there's going to be a lot of continued conversation about the benefits and the detriments of AI. But AI can help out in some capacities. I'll use a sports scenario. AI, if you took the information from any game, a football game, basketball game, whatever the case may be, put the box score in there, it will write you a story. Now, this has been happening for years. This isn't anything new. It'd have to be checked, but that would free the sports journalist up to go do more depth about what really happened in that. I mean, we had a basketball game the other night. What really happened? What were the dynamics of what happened? Because the basics of the game story, it's old news. Everybody has it. It was on TV. Everyone knows the result. Game stories on the web, newspaper type, they're obsolete at this point. You know, you're better off taking some video clips. You're better off getting some comments from the athletes, the coaches. You're better off looking at what made the difference in this game, not what happened in this game per se. So how, you know, so those tools can be used to ease the burden. You can take the city commission meeting, they stream it, take the video, put that in AI and say, give me a 300-word summary of what happened here. And then take the most important issue, the reporter, and write that story about that issue specifically and dig deeper into that and what that means for people. So those are some of the tools. It doesn't mean you just AI do it and you publish it. It still has to be human checked. I mean, human first, human last. So to check it on the back end. But it does alleviate some of that pressure to a certain degree. I know there's concerns, oh, AI is going to replace us. Well, not if you're a good reporter building relationships, talking to people.
So that brings me to my next question, which is a lot of journalists, or even just people I've talked to, have mentioned that they feel this loss of identity in the job. One, because of those hard deadlines, because you're like, you know, how much of myself can I put into this if I'm doing 47 stories this week, for example. But I think this also comes to our adaptation talk, because with AI, that identity is probably what's going to make your writing different. So can you talk about that balance?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you take your notes and put them in AI and have them write a story. I think you would lose a lot in doing that. It cannot write like a journalist writes per se. It'll regurgitate information. But the identity is such a big part of it. And I've had journalists who said, yeah, when I lost my job, when I quit my job, I didn't know who I was. It took me 6 months to figure out what I was going to do next, or because it is so ingrained in who we are. It's a profession where you can, at least this is the perception, you can do good for folks in a community. Like you said, that social responsibility. You can do something good, inform people and put them in a position to have more knowledge in every arena, social, economic, political, whatever the case may be, religious. So you're in a position of, hey, I can inform people and I can help people and I can do some good here. But it also allows you to take your creative notions and put those to work as well. So to blend that type of those types of things into a profession, you mean I get to write, I get to talk to people, and help the community? Now, I'm not sure the public sees it that way, but journalists see it that way. They don't go into it, and they've said this for a million years, they don't go into it to be rich. They go into it to be enriched and to enrich their communities. So how to do that? And when you commit to that, you're not so willing to give it up. It again goes back to the former student I was talking to just yesterday, and she feels guilty, and I also feel she's been one of these. I'm a journalist and I'm proud of that and I work hard and this is what it means, and yes, people attack me, but I don't care because I'm looking to find facts and show people what the world looks like. Is she surrendering some of that? Well, maybe in that capacity, but she can still take those skills and that passion, that ambition in a different way and work in different places. She can do advocacy journalism. She can work for think tanks or research organizations that do the same thing. Now that's not, getting your byline every day or whatever, but you're also not dealing with all the baggage and the pressures of that either. But and she's looking at some of those positions. But it's how do you find that? How do you find that balance? How do you find something you really love to do that you've done much of your life, writing or telling stories, and still get paid for it and make a living, but also fulfill that societal obligation you feel committed to.
And that societal obligation brings me to my next point. You talked about how a lot of people attack journalists right now, especially with ethical decisions. How does burnout play into ethics in journalism and just also ethical journalism in general?
Well, ethics hasn't changed. The elements of ethics hasn't changed. We're always going to deal with privacy issues, conflict of interest, to publish, not publish, names of victims. I mean, those elements don't change. What has happened in this world is accelerated. We have to make decisions much quicker than we used to. I've been in the newsroom when we've had to make a decision, and you had to go to print by midnight. So you had a couple hours to figure it out. Now it's like, get it up on social media. You have the information, we got to get it out there. Well, if it isn't vetted, if you can't confirm it, now all of a sudden you're forced to make an ethical decision in a condensed amount of time. And that's going to create mistakes. That's going to create problems because you just don't have the time to process everything, and you may not have all the information. Now, I also think, if you look at it, audiences are probably more forgiving of that as well. They understand the dynamic of, and there will be notations, we'll update the story as we get more information, or the case may be, but that pressure to publish and publish immediately, or to post immediately, it really creates a complication in terms of ethics. That you're going to end up, and it happens, second guessing after the fact and saying, well, we probably shouldn't have done fill in the blank. And the other thing is, it was always that, do you publish the name of fill in the blank, whoever, a victim or whatever. Well, with social media, it gets out there anyway. And now you've got to deal with, okay, it's already out there. Do we not publish it because of our ethical standards? Or because it's already out there, does it matter? And do we look foolish not publishing because we know the information's out there? We just, avoiding or neglecting the obvious. So those are, and they're not necessarily related to burnout, other than it creates more stressors and higher levels of stress in a short period of time, which could accelerate the environment of burnout, I'm sure.
Your research also suggests that journalists still have a really high commitment to professionalism, to accuracy, to quality of their work. Why is that?
Again, it's a social responsibility. They still, if you're traditionally trained, it's you get all the facts and you present it. Now it's like, okay, well, you should post that. You already know it. Let's get it out there. Well, I don't have everything. Maybe I'm wrong. Well, we don't care. We need to get it out there because other people are going to get it out there. And you're fighting the rumor mill as well, the social media rumor mill. They're putting things out there. If you're a reliable source, you want to be able to get it out there and to do that relatively quickly and not make mistakes. But you still have this commitment to high quality. And the journalists that I've spoken to and the work I've done, they'll say, yeah, our quality is down. And it was a little tricky because to find a quality measurement is complicated. So what I did was I asked the journalists to define, what does quality mean to you? And what does that quality look like now compared to 5 years ago? And that's where I had them measure against themselves. Because quality can mean, awards, it can mean a lot of different things. And I could not find a measurement, so I basically created one. And they were saying, yes, because we've had staff cuts, because we have more obligations, more responsibilities, our quality has diminished. I don't get to put as much time into a story or effort or make that extra phone call like I used to make, or go talk to that person like I used to do. So therefore, what I'm producing isn't as good as it used to be.
And if there is one thing from your research that you could tell or advise, I know you said earlier that it's more of just reporting your findings, but to newsroom leaders across the country, what would that be?
I've had these conversations and they ignore me. Well, again, they have to realize that their most valuable commodity, it's their people. If you don't take care of your people, everything else suffers. But that hasn't been the case. So how do you take care of your people? How do you give them proper training? How do you look for signs of burnout or stressors? How do you fairly compensate them for their work? You know, far be it from me, because I'm not in that role to tell you, you need to do this. That's just one of those ivory tower things, right? I'm in the ivory tower, I can throw rocks. I can't imagine what it would be like to have to be the editor or publisher of a newspaper these days, and to try to fulfill the obligations of which you want to fulfill with a smaller staff and all the other entities, and the economic pressure of that. It's incredibly difficult and complicated. But to be aware of who your people are and make them feel seen, and you know, to show concern, and how can we help your circumstance? How can we make it better for you? What do you seek, and how can we pursue that? So those are, and you know, I know that's a little bit of a squishy answer, but the people who know their people best are the people managing them. And I've seen a lot of great journalists and a lot of great bosses who stepped away simply because it was too much, or they just didn't feel as if the organization cared about who they were. And again, the economic conditions have been, you know, catastrophic to the publishers and the owners and all those editors who had to cut staff. I mean, these were their friends. This was not an easy thing. There's nothing easy about it. Unfortunately, the industry I love, the newspaper industry I love, was a little slow to react to new realities of digital journalism and different opportunities, and that caused that causes real consternation and problems as well.
Finally, before we wrap up, one of my favorite questions to ask my guests is, what is your favorite part about being in KU, a part of the KU community, working here at the School of Journalism?
Well, Jaden, it's you. It's you and the students, because the energy you bring, the excitement you bring, the ideas, you know, I know some of us older folks complain about the younger folks. Y'all are brilliant. You're so smart, and you're so energetic. You have a much better perspective, again, of work-life balance. That to me is the best part of being in this community, being on this campus, being in this building every day. Students coming, going, having those conversations, learning new things, hearing what they have to say, working with them through problems, addressing concerns, and of course this great faculty and staff we have in this building. I mean, working here is just, it's really a dream job that most days you don't think of it that way, you just kind of do the work, but it is. We have so many advantages of being surrounded by so many wonderful people every day that if I retire, I won't miss the job. You miss the people, you miss the relationships, and that's what this is. And so I try to appreciate that as much as I can now, because I know it won't always be there. I know you're going to graduate someday and do great things, and I hope to see you again, and I hope we have communications. But you know, I also understand that you got lives, and you want to go out there and do things, and we're always here to help and provide support. But we're here to, you know, it's like children being raised by their parents. Parents know we raise them to leave. Same thing. You come here for a few years, so we raise you to go out there and do great things, and we hope we do that. And it's just the absolute best. There's nothing like it to see the successes and to help students work through the hardships. You know, every day there are people struggling, and we want to help them as best as we can do that, if that's whatever the case may be.
Well, Dr. Reinardy, thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you for everything that you do at the journalism school. It's been amazing being a student under you and working with you, so I just really appreciate it. And furthermore, thank you for shedding light on the human side of journalism. Your work reminds us that strong journalism requires healthy journalists. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Crimson Chat. Be sure to follow us for more conversations that explore people, ideas, and challenges shaping our world right here at the University of Kansas. We'll see you next time.